Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Coming up on our program, we talk with controversial Rabbi Marvin Hier as he prepares to participate in President-elect Donald Trump's inauguration. And a conversation with big wave surfer Bianca Valenti about women competing for the first time this year in the coveted Mavericks surfing contest near Half Moon Bay. But first, the new year is off to a busy start in Sacramento, where Governor Jerry Brown unveiled his budget proposal this week. The governor warns that state revenues are shrinking, and California faces uncertainty as Donald Trump assumes the presidency.
That's why we're going to have to hold on to our hat here. This is going to be a rough ride, and we cannot tell where we're going to be in a few months.
Meanwhile, the governor's nominee for California Attorney General, Xavier Becerra, faced his first confirmation hearing. We'll also examine what we heard during President-elect Donald Trump's first news conference and how it might affect California. KQED's California politics and government reporter Marisa Lagos sat down to discuss all of that with Politico senior reporter David Siders.
Thanks so much for joining us, David.
Great to be here.
So, President-elect Donald Trump hosted his first press conference this week in more than 6 months. He covered a lot of ground, but there was one thing that caught my eye as a Californian when he talked a little bit about maybe being willing to play favorites moving forward. Let's take a look at what he said.
That was a beautiful scene on November 8th as those states started to pour in. And we focused very hard on those states, and they really reciprocated. And those states are going to have a lot of jobs, and they're going to have a lot of security. They're going to have a lot of good news for their veterans.
So if the president-elect is serious about what he's saying, what do you think this is going to mean for California?
I think it depends on where you're sitting. So people who have been opposed to Trump all along, I think that California is in for a real fight. You think about people who advocate for undocumented immigrants, for example, or for health care. On the other hand, I was at a chamber function just the other day talking to business people, and I think the almost unanimous feeling there is we don't know. Some things, maybe there's tax regulations that help their situation. On the other hand, some things could be disastrous. Yeah,
I mean, we obviously know that Obamacare repeal could punch a huge hole in the state budget. But yeah, I just wonder if, on the trade issues, on things like that, being a border state, it could be a little different than just looking at, say, healthcare and sanctuary city and immigration, right?
Well, I think you're right. The former mayor of San Francisco thinks that we should use CEQA, right? Environmental Quality Act to block the wall. That certainly would be particular to California. Whatever version of that is in Texas is not as strong as California's.
Yeah. So returning to Sacramento, where obviously any of these changes would be felt, Governor Jerry Brown unveiled a budget this week, and I would say he was vintage Brown in unveiling this. Let's take a look at the governor making his case for keeping spending down.
And I don't think it makes any sense or even very decent to pretend we've got money when we don't, because the having it means having it over a whole budget cycle, and to spend and then cut and then have all those problems that we saw under Gray Davis and under Arnold Schwarzenegger. I don't want to repeat that.
So he took a little swipe there at his predecessors. I mean, what did you make of the press conference in general and the budget?
Well, we've heard this from the governor before, right? He's gone through the litany of previous governors who have left deficits for his successors, and I think the governor doesn't want to be that. But this is an interesting way that he frames the whole budget debate, right? He says that this is a choice of a fixed amount of dollars, and if you're a social service advocate or an advocate for the low-income people, you say that's the wrong frame, and that actually we have more money in that improving the lives of people at the bottom, spending some now, lifts all boats, right? We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. There was a couple things that he kind of called out that he wants to either eliminate or sort of cap spending on that seem like they could really pose big fights with the legislature. So one of them is this Middle Class Scholarship Act for funding college for middle-class students. And the other one is housing. He basically took off the table a $400 million fund that he had kind of dangled out there last year if they were willing to make some regulatory changes. I mean, do you think those are going to be the big points of disagreement with lawmakers, or is it going to be over just how much money is there to fight over?
Well, the revenue estimates, I think, are always an important thing. But keep in mind, this is January, so he's not going to give the Democratic lawmakers everything they want in the January proposal. That wouldn't suit his negotiating purposes. So he has things he wants done between now and June, and I think he's willing to spend if he gets some of those things done. And the biggest one, probably the biggest push, I think, out of this budget from him, the newest thing, was the acknowledgement that extending cap and trade beyond 2020 would require a 2/3 vote in the legislature, and really now asking the legislature to do it. And I think it's highly uncertain what he does.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be an interesting fight between environmentalists who have been very happy with his climate change policy, and obviously, you know, the sort of more moderate Democrats who have been a little more willing to stand up with oil, who did open the door to cap and trade this week. That'll be fun. There's another thing that was happening around the Capitol this week I want to get to, though. Jerry Brown's nomination for Attorney General, Xavier Becerra, was in town, I think, 2 days. Tell me what we saw and what just happened on Friday. We saw, I think, another episode in this ongoing, at least since Trump's election, every opportunity California Democrats get to position themselves as the counterweight. And the confirmation hearing with Xavier Becerra was a cakewalk, and it was meant to be a show of force, I think, around him. And we saw the assembly ultimately today confirm him. Yeah, so immigration is obviously a huge concern. And, you know, I think we heard Becerra pretty forcefully say anything within our power we're going to do. But, you know, he also opened the door to the fact that there are things that California just can't do. I mean, do you think, like, is his role going to be more of a figurehead in talking about immigration, or do you think we're actually going to see some court battles if he's, confirmed, which I think is going to happen pretty easily? Just judging from the model of attorney generals past, they tend to be people who actually are filing litigation and are involved. And if he really is the model, say, on the former Texas attorney general fighting the Obama administration, which I think might be, then we probably would see that. On the other hand, he's competing. There's only so much space to have this fight, and he's competing with some other very big personalities, the gubernatorial candidates, the mayors of big cities. And so I'm not sure where he falls in that whole spectrum. You covering Sacramento and a big city, maybe you have a better feeling of what that might look like. Well, you know, it's LA. He's from LA too, so LA politics are always like a different animal than San Francisco politics. Before we end, I want to turn back to national politics. Actually, our president-elect will be taking the oath of office in just a week, and I wanted to get you to weigh in on a particularly nasty exchange we saw between Donald Trump and a reporter at a press conference this week. Let's look at that.
Well, I'm not releasing the tax returns because, as you know, they're under audit.
But every president since the 70s has
Oh, gee, I've never heard that. Gee, I've never heard that. I've never heard that. You know, the only one that cares about my tax returns are the reporters, okay? They're the only ones. But no, I don't think so. I won.
Do you believe
I mean, I became president.
So he did win. But I'm wondering if you think this is an issue that the public still cares about. And just given the sort of, adversarial tone there, what does this mean moving forward for reporters and the public in general?
The political consultants I talk to say the public wants to see tax returns, but then they look at a vote like they did in November, so they may want to see tax returns, but it may not be their deciding issue. Mm-hmm. And we've seen that before, too. The current governor, Jerry Brown, did not release his tax returns in the 2010 campaign, breaking from years of tradition, and neither did Meg Whitman. And I'm not sure, he still has sky-high approval ratings. So I think it's unclear. But he was never that adversarial with the press, would you say? Wow. Maybe not as adversarial as the president-elect, but yeah, he's had some run-ins.
Yeah.
But not like the president-elect. That's on a different scale. And how the press interacts with the president, I think, is really interesting to watch in the coming months. I think it was also interesting to see the whole thing with the CNN reporter and whether questions even get answered.
Right. Well, we'll have a lot more to discuss. Thank you so much for being here, David Siders.
Thank you.
Next week's inauguration ceremony for Donald Trump will include blessings from 6 religious leaders, including a rabbi from Los Angeles. Rabbi Marvin Hier is founder and dean of the Simon Wiesenthal Center in L.A. Their mission is to confront anti-Semitism. And he founded the Museum of Tolerance, dedicated to education about the Holocaust. Rabbi Hier's participation in the inauguration has prompted anger among many American Jews who object to Trump's comments about minorities. KQED senior editor of politics and government, Scott Shafer, spoke with Rabbi Hier earlier today.
Rabbi Hier, welcome to Newsroom.
Thank you.
Let me begin by asking you about your decision to participate in Friday's inauguration. It's generated some controversy, as you know, in the Jewish community, which voted overwhelmingly for Hillary Clinton. Tell us about your decision. Why did you decide you were going to say a prayer in the inauguration Friday?
Well, first, I must be very honest and frank. It didn't take me very long to say that I would participate. It's an honor. My parents were immigrants that came to the United States in the 1920s to escape anti-Semitism. The United States is the freest and greatest democracy in the world. And when the inauguration committee asked me to give a prayer for the 45th President of the United States, I considered it to be an honor and a duty to say yes.
Yeah, and what are you going to say, and how do you think your participation will matter?
Well, I'm going to say a prayer. I know that I'm going to speak as a representative of the Jewish community. The prayers will come from Jewish sources, from biblical sources, of course. I hope it'll have a 21st century ring to it. And for me, look, I know that I should point out that it's not, even though I've never participated at an inauguration, I've had the privilege of giving invocations to 4 presidents of the United States: Ronald Reagan, George H. Bush, George W. Bush, William Jefferson Clinton. And if it would have been a Democratic president, then they'd ask me, the answer would be the same.
I've seen you said that you're hoping that we should all pray, Americans should all pray for the success of this new president. And I'm wondering, you mentioned that you come from a family of immigrants. Of course, there's been some controversial comments that President-elect Trump has made about immigrants, as well as Muslims. Do you feel like you're endorsing those things in participating, or might you even, in some subtle way, condemn those things and ask for more tolerance?
Not at all. I don't think I would lose my voice for attending the inauguration. I've spoken out before. I'm a critic. I was a critic of the idea of deporting 12 million Latinos and Mexicans from this country. I've spoken out against every president, against Barack Obama when I thought he was wrong, Ronald Reagan, George H. Bush, George W. Bush, and I don't think that I would change. In other words, the fact that I'm invited to an inauguration of a president, if I believe the president is wrong in the future, I will be amongst those who speak up.
The goal of the museum, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, the Museum of Tolerance, of course, is to teach about the Holocaust, to root out anti-Semitism, call out anti-Semitism. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about Trump's comments this week comparing the U.S. intelligence agency and the release of information about him to Nazi Germany, the kind of smear that would have happened in Nazi Germany. What are your thoughts about that kind of rhetoric?
Well, I wouldn't have used that kind of rhetoric. But I would say this: I don't really believe that Donald Trump thinks that the United States or the press in the United States equals what took place in Germany for 1933 and 1945.
Why would he use that kind of rhetoric?
If I were the president's advisor and he said to me, "Do you think I should use such language?" my answer would be absolutely not.
Does it disturb you that he does use that kind of language and that he calls for a ban on Muslims? He's kind of walked that back a bit. But, I mean, are these things and other things that he has said even consistent with the tenets of Judaism?
Yes. First of all, it's not, I'm against any registry of any ethnic group. Let me be very clear of my position. I'm not embarrassed to tell you what my position is. I'm against any ban on Muslims, on any other ethnic group or religion. I am absolutely in favor of a registry on behalf of jihadists. If the U.S. intelligence services and intelligence services around the world want to keep tabs on jihadists, I think that is a great idea.
Are you concerned about a slippery slope kind of a situation where, you could, some might compare what happened with Jews, in the 1930s?
Not really. I mean, listen, you had people that supported in Europe during the war. You had those that were National Socialists, and you had those that were not National Socialists. If a person declares, I am a jihadist, I want to end Western civilization, he belongs on a registry. If he is not a jihadist, we should absolutely not discriminate.
Let me ask you about one of the most controversial members of his inner circle, Donald Trump. That is Steve Bannon, former head of Breitbart News. He has been associated with the alt-right movement, including some white supremacy movement. members as well as anti-Semitic groups. I'm not saying that he necessarily endorses those groups or their philosophy, but does it concern you that somebody with that association of organizations is that close to the president?
Well, first let me say, I know very well and respect Alan Dershowitz. I know him for many years.
The Harvard attorney.
Alan Dershowitz is a Democrat. He has stated emphatically that Steve Bannon is not an anti-Semite. Alan Dershowitz is not a stranger to what constitutes an anti-Semite. I take his word for it.
But does it concern you at all, given the association of this person?
I'm concerned about the alt-right, and I'm concerned about the alt-left that we hear nothing about. There's almost dead silence when it comes to the extreme left.
Yeah. Let me ask you about the president-elect's choice of ambassador. David Friedman, ambassador to Israel. He's called President Obama a blatant anti-Semite. He supports settlements. He supports, he's compared liberal American Jews with Nazi collaborators. Are you concerned at all about that kind of rhetoric?
Look,
I mean, I guess what I'm really getting at with many of these questions, Rabbi, is where's the healing? Where's the reconciliation?
Well, first of all, let me say, I don't know the ambassador designate. I know that he's a committed Jew, and I judge him on what he's going to do. You made a statement regarding settlements. I have a point of view on that. One of the biggest phony things that has ever occurred is the peddling by American politicians that settlements are the only obstacle or the main obstacle to a Middle East solution. Anyone with any knowledge of the Middle East should be wondering about this question. Why is it that we've discussed settlements for maybe 15 years on a regular basis at the UN, Secretary of State's, presidents have mentioned it, but since Hamas, a terrorist organization, has taken over Gaza, no U.S. official or member of the Security Council has had the guts to go before the Security Council and say the following: I want to meet on the objective of how we dislodge Hamas from Gaza, a terrorist organization committed to the total destruction of the state of Israel.
All right, Rabbi, I'm afraid we're almost at the end. Very, very quickly, if you could tell Donald Trump, and I'm sure perhaps you can, one thing, what would it be?
Unify the country. We can't, we've had our great differences. The political season is over. The right thing to do is for every American to pray that Donald Trump turns into a great president. That would be the patriotic thing to do.
All right, Rabbi Marvin Hier, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
The Mavericks big wave surfing contest is about to get a big change. For the first time ever, there will be a women's only heat. 6 women competing for a $30,000 prize. The move comes after a steady campaign by top women surfers to gain access to the prestigious competition. One of the most vocal advocates has been San Francisco surfer Bianca Valenti. And she joins me now in the studio. Bianca, so nice to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Well, what went through your mind when they announced that, yes, this year the Mavericks contest will be open to women?
Yeah, I was just absolutely excited and inspired, and just think it's a huge step forward for the future.
You've been outspoken for a number of years, pushing for more women opportunities in competitive surfing. What does this moment mean for you personally?
Yeah, it's breaking the glass ceiling, and it's not just, it is a personal glass ceiling, but it's also just a huge step forward in the big picture of equality and opportunity for women, in sports and as a whole.
And how will the competition work this year? Women will be in a separate heat from the men, is that right?
Yeah, so we'll have a 1-hour heat, and there are 6 women in the heat, and so in that time period, you have to try to catch 2 waves. They get scored out of 10 points. Your best ride gets doubled in score. So risk is rewarded. They want you to go big. Basically, if you get a score in the excellent range, an 8 or above, you're going to beat anybody who just goes for a safety ride in the mid-range.
All right, so want to hear more about your experience as a surfer as well. What does it feel like when you're out there on a surfboard?
Yeah, so I always like to think of it as a conscious meditation because everything stands still the moment you catch a wave. And leading up to it, it's exciting, it's exhilarating, it's scary. There's just a range of emotions. You feel every emotion at once, and then you get to prioritize what emotions you want to give the most importance.
And tell us about some of the worst wipeouts you've had. I'm sure there have been quite a few.
Yeah, let's see. One time I was actually out and Sarah Gerhardt gave me a little tip to sit kind of to the side. And so this wave, I was just trying to go over it. And this wave caught me and took me straight into the bowl, which is where the waves break the hardest. And I had to take about 6 40-foot waves on the head. And I was breathing so hard, my voice went hoarse. And I've broken my ribs here. I've injured my knee multiple times, but it's all good.
And the video we just saw was not only of you wiping out, but some other surfers as well. And it shows clearly how risky it can be. And do you think about the risk when you're out there? There have been deaths at Mavericks. I mean, those swells can be anywhere from 25 to 80 feet.
Yeah, no, it's important to think about risk versus reward, especially in the conditions and what waves do you want to catch. And I like to think of big wave surfers, and especially myself, as a calculated risk taker. I'm not going to go for something that's stupid. Like when the winds come from the south, it creates this huge bump up the face, and so the risk versus reward doesn't make sense.
Well, because everybody remembers when Mark Fu died out at Mavericks in 2014. That was a big story.
Mark Fu, Simon Wiesenthal, I mean, these are some of the most incredible surfers in the world, and big wave surfing is life or death, and so that's why it's so inspiring, because it forces you to be the best you can be.
And how do you train for this? You train all the time for these enormous waves.
Yeah, so I do movement-based strength training 3 days a week in the gym. I go to the pool and I do interval training. We add in some breath hold tactics in the gym and at the pool.
You hold and you can hold your breath for a long time, 4 minutes. Is that right?
Yeah, that is right.
How do you do that?
Anyone can do it. It's all up here, and that's probably the biggest part of the training is mental training. And I mean, no matter how much physical training or how much skill you have, you really have to believe in yourself.
Okay, but I like to think of myself as someone who believes in myself, but really 4 minutes sounds so extraordinary to me. How do you get there?
I know, it sounds crazy, but in a 2-hour seminar, you could do it, trust me. Yeah, you have to learn how to calm your heart rate beforehand, and that's what it is. It's about staying calm in the face of danger.
And then, some people describe surfing almost like a religion, right? I mean, I used to scuba dive. I haven't gone in a long time, but I know that when I was in the throes of it, when you're down there under the water, 100 feet down below, you get into sort of this meditative state. Do you get into that state when you're surfing, or is there a different kind of religion?
No, absolutely, yeah. Surfing is my church, and it's my Prozac. It's everything. It makes me a better person. I can't imagine my life without it. And it is a great sport, and it's a great metaphor for life and how you go through life. We're always going to wipe out. You're always going to face obstacles. Do you let those obstacles defeat you, or do you view those obstacles as a new opportunity to learn something?
You're originally from Dana Point, but you've been living in San Francisco full-time since 2009, is that right?
That's right.
And you surf a lot at Ocean Beach, but you started surfing Mavericks about 4 years ago.
Yeah.
What makes Mavericks so special for you?
Mavericks is, arguably the Mount Everest of big wave surfing, and I mean, the first time you go out there, it's really magical and majestic. The energy comes out of nowhere, and you're just awestruck. And then to even try to ride that wave, like I said, it inspires you to be the best that you can be in the water and out of the water. And so I think that's what keeps me coming back for more, is that pursuit.
How did you do the first time you went out to Mavericks? Did you wipe out, and did you do okay?
The first time I was mostly spectating, and then there's kind of a wider spot that you can be a little more safe. You can go out in the channel, and it's really spectacular to see whether you surf or not. Because the ocean is calm, and then, like I said, this amount of energy that can light up the entire city of San Francisco comes out of nowhere, and you're just like, whoa, it makes you feel that the greater power of the universe.
You're one of the elite women surfers in the world. That's why you're competing in Mavericks. Do you have any sponsors?
I have some local sponsors, but no, it's a challenge in our sport, whether you're male or female, and it's a question.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think it's so challenging to get sponsors in the surfing world?
Because nobody owns the ocean, and so like with soccer and baseball and football, the stadium can sell the ad space, and so we need to think of a new model for surfing in order to monetize it. But I think that what is so powerful about what we do is the art of it, and what can we do to inspire change in the world through it, and that's what I would like to see in surfing.
And I know you've also been vocal on the issue of how women are portrayed in ad campaigns around surfing. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that's been an issue since I was a little kid, and it's something that really used to upset me, was women constantly being portrayed in this sexual manner in surfing. And it's so important to have diversity in role models, and that's why It Ain't Pretty, the film De La Soul just made, is so awesome, because we want to be promoted and progress our sport and share what we do for our athleticism. And, you know, it's about creating equality, not about your looks.
All right, and just to wrap it up real quickly, what's next for you? What's your ultimate goal for surfing for women?
I'd love to win Mavericks, but I'd love to see a big wave tour for women, and just, like I said, to inspire change through surfing, to change the world through surfing. That's my dream.
All right, and Mavericks could happen any time between now and the end of March. We'll be watching, and I know you'll be watching this as well. Bianca Valenti, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And also, we want to give our thanks to filmmaker De La Soul for all the surfing footage you just saw. Her film, It Ain't Pretty, will be released February 7th on iTunes, Amazon, and DirecTV. And that is it for us. But before we go, a reminder, KQED Newsroom is moving to a different time slot next week. Starting next Friday, January 20th, the show will air at 7 p.m. We're kicking off our new time that day with a 1-hour inauguration special. We'll have coverage from Washington, D.C. and right here in California. That's next Friday at 7 p.m. Hope to see you here. And as always, for more of our coverage, you can always go to kqed.org/newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Thanks for watching.